tomorrow. So I'm very glad that Doug is here. If you have not met Doug before, this is Doug Lyons. Doug is the executive director of the Connecticut Association of Independent Schools. He is a longtime friend of Renbrook School. He is the gentleman who most recently in our initiative to do the strategic planning was the facilitator for it, but he's been here many times, and he is highly educated, he's highly experienced, he's highly credentialed, and it's a real treat to be able to host Doug here tonight. So if you didn't come to hear me introduce him, you came to hear Doug. So Doug, thank you for being here.
Thanks,
sir.
my pleasure. Thanks. Part of my role in the Connecticut Association is I'm deputized by the State of Connecticut Department of Education to do the accreditation of schools like Renbrook. So when I come here to visit, they generally tell me they're happy to see me, but I am sort of the academic version of the IRS. Tonight, I'm going to sprint through big topic. There'll be some slides that are text heavy, and the reason I've left them in is because all of the slides will be on the Renbrook website tomorrow. So if some of the big concepts are intriguing, you can go back and at your own leisure take a look at some of the slides. You may remember some of the concepts that I spoke about, and there'll also be some text on some of the slides that I will not refer to tonight. This is a line from The Tempest. What's past is prologue. For hundreds of years, people believed this to be true, and it was true for hundreds of years. What essentially it says, Shakespeare is saying that the best way to understand present time and the best way to predict the future is to know the past. To know and understand the past. Well, very few futurists or historians are quoting The Tempest nowadays because there is a growing belief that the future is not what it used to be. Okay? What does that mean? What it means is that largely a result of technology, which is powerful and, more and more a part of life at earlier and earlier ages. In the current day, the past has never been a weaker prediction of the future than it is now. Okay, when I was a college kid, I went to Marshall McLuhan lectures. He's a futurist, and I thought he was fascinating. Most of what McLuhan spoke about, I had no idea what the man was talking about. It all sounded very interesting. And I thought I would record in a notebook some of the concepts I found to be most intriguing in the hopes that someday I would understand them. So I loved this line, 1968, the future will not be about earning a living. The future will be about learning a living. Okay, well, I had no idea in 1968 what he was talking about, but I know now. And that is, up until the generation that is currently called the millennials, okay, up until the millennial generation, if you graduated from law school, med school, vet school, architecture school, engineering school, dental school, whatever professional school you had graduated from, you're 28, 32, 36, you had a right to believe when you accepted that diploma that you had learned most of what you would need to know for a long and successful career. So you graduate as a dentist at age 32, and you figure, you know what? I know my profession. Is that true today? It has never been less true, okay? Why is that? All right, I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in Levittown, New York. I mean, how all-American is that? I grew up on Daisy Lane in Levittown, New York, and every house on Daisy Lane was essentially the same, but the house on the corner. The house on the corner didn't have a garage. It had a garage, but the garage was a pediatrician's office. So when I was sick or had to go for a medical checkup, my mom could just walk me down to the corner, and I'd go into Dr. John's garage, which was his medical office. Well, at some point in my childhood, Dr. John brought in another doctor, and it became a pediatric practice. The other doctor was Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob was Dr. John's son. How wonderful is that? So Dr. Bob is 65, Dr. Bob is 36. I have an ear infection, something hurts. I remember my mother taking me down to the pediatric group and my mother saying to the nurse, Diane, I don't want Dr. Bob examining Douglas. I don't want Dr. Bob. My mother did not want the 36-year-old. My mother thought his medical bag was Fisher-Price. She couldn't imagine that a 36-year-old had the depth of knowledge that Dr. John had. Okay? Fast forward to today. A child has a medical condition. It's causing her some sleepless nights. She's uncomfortable. Her mother takes her to a pediatric group. It's a mother-daughter group. And the mother is Dr. Karen. She's 65. And the daughter is Dr. Ellen. She's 35. Who do you think the mother is maybe hoping will examine her child? The 35-year-old. What happened in one generation? Why does the mother want the 35-year-old?
They have technology at disposal.
She assumes, not always correctly, but it's an accurate assumption in many cases. She assumes that the 35-year-old physician is more current, is facile with the latest technology, and the latest technology is light years ahead in terms of understanding, diagnosing pediatric illness. Okay? So, wow, what a change. So for the first time in history, we have a generation of children in Renbrook, kids in your homes, no matter what profession they choose, no matter what professional work they choose, you can be sure that your children will be relearning their professions throughout their careers. They will be relearning their professions throughout their careers. So if that's true, and it's true, then if you graduate from school, elementary school, middle school, high school, if you graduate from school and you have neutral or negative memories of the experience of learning. In earlier generations, that might have been a career disadvantage, that you have a negative disposition toward taking an intellectual risk, being comfortable with things you don't initially understand. In earlier generations, to graduate with that emotional mindset, it would have been a disadvantage. For your children, a neutral or negative disposition toward learning is a disability. It's not a disadvantage. It will be a career disability. Okay, there are independent schools and then there are high-tier independent schools. The schools in the Connecticut Association are what I would call high-tier independent schools, in that these are schools that operate free from government bureaucracy, and they are led by people who remain current, who are always in the learning cycle. Okay, and I would say that what happens at a school like Renbrook, what happens in the first 10 years of learning, is infinitely more consequential than what happens here. And my friends who teach here agree with that. Why? Because it's rare that a child discovers a love of learning after she's been admitted to Yale. It either happens before or it's pick and shovel work after. Okay, now, just to show you that I pay for my opinions, these are mine. And I'm grateful that 529s are now tax deductible, because when my twins graduated from Georgetown 13 years ago, I thought my tuition paying days were over. Fast forward. Welcome to my grandchildren. I'm paying 4 tuitions. My wife and I have made the decision that the money we have saved for a long time and continue to save, the money will go to the elementary years and maybe the high school years. And if there's not enough left for college, we're fine with that. because I would rather send a cheeky, independent, iconoclastic, tenacious, high motivation kid to the University of Connecticut because we ran out of funds and we're going to pay state tuition. I would rather send that high-charged kid to a state college where that kid will find every possible advantage there is on that campus than to have the child understimulated, undermotivated, or to have a child through a series of academic experiences that were not, in fact, pleasurable. So, there are 4 levels of schooling. And I have taught, by the way, at all levels. I've taught elementary grades, I've taught middle school grades, I've taught high school, I've taught college, I've taught grad school. Elementary, secondary, undergraduate, graduate. All 4 levels deal with facts, content, skills. That's the currency of education. All 4 levels deal in knowledge. But the first 2 levels, especially the first level, deals in something far more foundational and powerful, and that is the development of a disposition. Okay, so if you think of learning, the way we think of DNA as a double helix, on one side of the learning helix is the acquisition of knowledge, facts, skills, theories. Okay, we used to think that this was the primary purpose and the primary effect of learning. And then we used to think that the development of a disposition, a mindset, motivations, intuitions, behaviors toward learning, we used to think that these were sort of desirable side effects. Like, wouldn't it be nice? The kid has accumulated a vast amount of data available to recall, and maybe feels good about it. Okay? Nowadays, unfortunately, and I was in public education for 20 years, was superintendent of schools in one of America's wealthiest Manhattan suburbs, and I left. And I left because in public education, the focus on what we now call old smart is a requirement of the federal government. Public schools are evaluated based upon test scores, and these are tests that are measured by Scantron machines, which means they can only measure skills that can be measured by a machine. So essentially, we are evaluating public school systems on the basis of low-level cognitive recall. That's what it is. And as a public school superintendent in a wealthy community, I hired some fantastic teachers and then asked them to teach badly because the school needed the test score, because our reputation was entirely dependent upon it. Okay. You look at the focus of independent schools. Independent schools believe in test measurable skills. Most schools like Renbrook do give tests, do give standardized tests, do find the information to be valuable as one of many measures of achievement, not the sole measure of achievement and not the most powerful measure of achievement. Okay? So when you look at a high-tier independent school, we're looking at schools that are focused on new smart. Old smart is a quantity concept. Okay, so the 1950s, 1970s valedictorian, who's that? That's the one kid in every graduating class who has the most information available for recall. Okay, that's the valedictorian. The future will not reward those people highly anymore, because what new smart is, yes, we want third graders to memorize the multiplication tables, no question about it, okay? But new smart is a quality concept, meaning that we're interested in the quality of kids' thinking. We want to know that they think. We want to know that they can analyze, synthesize, evaluate, judge, create new knowledge from baseline knowledge. We also want to know that these are kids who are able to collaborate, to think and plan and dream and design with other kids, including kids who do not look like them, do not sound like them, do not live where they live, do not speak their language. The future is about worldwide collaboration. I have a good friend who has a company. He employs 90 employees. He's only met 5 of them. The other 90 he has interacted with only over Skype. He has not met them in person. And in many of those Skype sessions, there's a translator. That's the future. Okay, so I said, part of the goal of a place like Renbrook is, in fact, the development of a positive disposition. What are dispositions? Resourcefulness, curiosity. All children are born curious. It's a fact of birth. Children become more or less curious based upon how their curiosity, what's the response to their curiosity, depending upon whether the environment they grow in appreciates their curiosity, satisfies their curiosity, challenges their curiosity. Optimism. Optimism, we know, is in part inherited, but optimism is in part learned behavior. And it's learned from models, it's learned from lessons. So in terms of dispositions, how long does it take to teach a child to read? It's a good example because this was a question that was asked of me many times when I was the headmaster at Greenwich Country Day School. So Greenwich Country Day, 1,000 kids, elementary, this is my world, elementary, these are my people. Mothers would often ask me, Dr. Lyons, how long does it take to teach a child how to read? And they would often have Siegfried, in tow, and he looks like he's 2, and I would say, well, in order to answer that question, I have to tell you what my definition of reading is. Okay, so for me, reading is 3 things. It's the ability to decode the sound-symbol relationship in the English language. So decoding is part of it. The second criteria is the child decodes the language with a high degree of comprehension. So it's not just about parsing language, it's about understanding what you've just read fairly quickly. And the third criteria is the activity is done with some degree of pleasure. Okay, so for me, how long does it take to teach a child how to read? Using those 3 criteria, I would say to parents, depends upon when you start. If you start at age 3, flashcards, workbooks, performing for grandmom. You start at age 3, for most children, takes 3 years. You start at age 4, takes 2 years. Start at age 5, it takes 1 year. But the difference for most children between starting at age 5 is when you've started at age 5, you have respected the development of the child's brain. You've understood it, you've respected it, and you run the risk for many children. I've seen it, I've lived with it, not in my own family, but in others' families. It's a hollow victory to teach a 4-year-old how to read if in the process you have damaged the child's disposition to view reading as a pleasurable activity. That's forever. Because that kid is not going to view reading as a satisfying alternative to video games at age 13. That kid will forever view the act of reading as an inherently anxiety-producing, stressful experience, a performance achievement path in childhood, long before the brain was ready to please mommy. Okay, so, remember this ad? Why do most 16-year-olds drive like they're driving missing part of their brain? Well, and it says because they are. This is not entirely sarcasm. Okay, this is based to some degree on neuroscience. Okay, and I had a personal experience with this. I was a college graduate. I was in the military during the Vietnam era. I was stationed in San Antonio, Texas. I got a 5-day pass, and I was going to hop an overnight flight to land at Logan Airport. I was going to rent a car, and I was going to march into my girlfriend's 2nd grade classroom in Newton, Mass. Total surprise. Hadn't seen my girlfriend in 6 months. She didn't know whether she'd ever see me again because Vietnam was a possibility. I was going to walk into that classroom, full dress uniform. Those kids were going to see an embrace they would remember for the rest of their lives. No movie, no romantic movie would ever compete with that day, that crazy guy from Texas. So I get to Logan, and I want to rent a car. And I forget the car rental place, but I walk up and I say, I'd like a car. What kind of a car? Any car. Well, we have, I said, I know, it doesn't matter. Whatever car you have, fast. First car you have, I'll take it. She says, okay, fine. Can I see ID? So I give her my military ID and my New York State driver's license. And the woman says to me, 1974, says, I'm sorry, sir, I can't rent you a car. I said, excuse me? You can't rent me a car? This is an anti-military thing? What do you mean you can't rent me a car? She said, I'm sorry, sir, I can't rent you a car. I said, well, Budget will rent me a car. Alamo will rent, I mean, this is ridiculous, you won't rent me a car. She said, sir, no one will rent you a car. Do you know why? I wasn't old enough. I was 24. College grad, military, dress uniform, not old enough to rent a car. Why was that? Who determined that? Do you know how that was determined? We didn't have the neuroscience. It was determined by insurance actuarialists. These are people who study risk. And these insurance risk managers said, renting a car to a 24-year-old, it's a bad business model. They bang up the car, you can't collect, they don't have any assets. You can't sue them, they don't own anything yet. They just got out of college. So I couldn't rent a car. Oh, and there was no Uber. All right, so back then, this was all about nap. Fast forward, access to the human brain now, it's not post-mortem dissections. I mean, that was how we studied the brain until the 1980s and 1990s. We studied dead people's brains, often diseased brains of older people. Fast forward now, the advances in neuroscience, a neuroscientist can hook up a kid. The kid's alive. This is an alive and young. And this kid can be put through a series of intellectual exercises. This kid can be asked to perform a mathematical problem-solving exercise. He can be asked to remember his birthday party and talk about it. He can be asked to sing a song. He can be asked to write something. And neuroscientists can track on a computer screen, can track what parts of the brain light up when he is performing a mathematical operation versus what parts of the brain light up when he's remembering his birthday party. We can map the brain. It's amazing. One of the most fascinating experiments, this is MIT, the Brain Lab. And I love this because of how data rich this is. What MIT has done is they've taken highly accomplished jazz pianists and they put them in a functional MRI machine. And they put them in twice, separated by a coffee break. The first time they go in, they ask them to play a piece of music that's been somebody else wrote it. And they either memorize it or they've got music in there. And they're playing a piece of pre-written music. And the neuroscientists are looking at what parts of the brain are being activated. Second time, they put the jazz pianist in. They say, you know what now? Just play from your soul. Pure improv. What's fascinating is not that different parts of the brain light up when the jazz pianist is in a completely creative activity. Obviously, we're going to think different parts of the brain will be lit up. What's more fascinating is the part of the brain that is completely chilled. There's a part of the brain that is just put on chill. What part of the brain is that? It's the part of the brain that controls coloring in the lines, playing by the rules, doing what you're supposed to do, like when you studied music, you can't do discordant notes. Ooh, that wouldn't be good. So in order to achieve this kind of greatness in creativity, this musician is putting aside the rules. Now, interesting implications for that. Okay. If you look at the human brain architecturally, it's a little bit of a mess in that it's not one integrated unit. The human brain is 3 semi-independent brains. Okay. And that's part of how we evolved. We evolved from reptiles. Okay. So the first brain, the brain that's instinct, that's the brain we share with reptiles. Okay. The middle brain we share with mammals, and the prefrontal cortex, that's the adult brain, the human brain. We're the only animal on the planet that actually has the capacity to think about our thinking, to behave in moral ways. That is a uniquely human brain. But in our lives, we code switch. Okay? A healthy, mature adult generally makes adult decisions in the adult brain. Oh, back to this for a minute. When my son was 17, he would want to have the car. Well, take the car out on a Friday night. And I'd say, take the car on a Friday night. You need to be back by 11. And my son would say, Dad, what are you, nuts? No, he's back by 11. All my friends are out later than that. I mean, why can't I just have the car? Before neuroscience, I would have to say to him, son, I do trust you. I just don't trust the circumstances. 17-year-olds driving around Greenwich, 12 o'clock at night. That's all I had. Now I have neuroscience. Okay. So now I can say to my grandsons, Max, Scotty, you can't have the car late at night because, see, son, you're actually missing a part of your brain. But since that's the part of the brain that would understand this discussion, that might not be effective. Okay, but the part of the brain that's missing, the prefrontal cortex, okay, that part of the brain controls maturity, mature decisions, a mature understanding of consequences. Okay. And we do not reliably use that brain until we're in our mid-20s. That's why you had to be 25 to rent a car. That's why we use the term college kids. You think, college kids? These are 22-year-olds. Yeah, but you know what? Neurologically, there's a lot of kid in that 22-year-old. Okay, so birth to age 2. Okay, a baby cries when she's hungry. Nobody taught her how to cry. It's effective. Somebody comes with a bottle or a breast. So it's effective. It's an instinct. It's not learned behavior. A baby cries when he's wet. Somebody comes and changes his diaper. Nobody taught him that. It's an instinct. So early in life, our birth to age 2, a little bit of 3, our behaviors are largely instinctive behaviors, the behaviors of all animals, including human babies. You get into age 3, 4, 5, 6, up to the 20s, and now thinking and learning occurs in the middle brain, the limbic system brain. And the limbic system brain it's the emotional brain. Now, what do I mean by emotional brain? 8-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds, okay, their lives are controlled by how they receive information and how that information is processed. Okay? Children have feelings and emotions, and they're not the same thing. From a neurological standpoint, they're different. Feelings are psychological events in the brain. Anger, sadness, joy. When you're having a feeling, you generally know you're having a feeling. And hopefully, if it's a negative feeling, it will pass. Emotions are deep-rooted neurological events in the brain. And when they're acting on our behavior and our thinking, we are often not fully aware. We haven't given them permission, okay? But there's a reason why humans have emotional responses. And these are split-second responses. And the reason why humans have split-second emotional responses are because we are programmed to survive, and we have a survival mechanism in our brains. What do I mean by that? I'm walking my dog in the woods. It's a dark night, no moon. I've walked my dog in the woods many times, okay? All of a sudden I hear a sound I've never heard before. What happens immediately? Without me even thinking about it. Immediately, my heart begins to pick up speed, and that circulates blood out to my fingers and my toes. What happened? Fight or flight response? My body, my brain responded emotionally to a sound in the woods I've never heard before. My limbic system felt the threat. Okay? So the information came into my limbic system, and the body said, uh-oh, Doug, could be a problem here, pal. But a split second later, that information went to the cortex, and it was corrected. Because the thinking brain said, it's probably a limb. There was a lot of wind last night. It's probably a limb that had fallen down, but not completely. So I corrected for it, okay? What that means is that throughout life, we receive information. It's processed in the middle brain, especially in childhood, less so in adulthood. And a split second or so later, it's sent to the thinking brain. Okay, so, all right. For years, I tried to figure out, is there a graphic way I can explain, I can show people how the brain reacts, especially the brain in a child. The brain reacts in the middle brain first, sends the information up to the cognitive brain. And then I'm watching Channel 8 News, and up comes one of these, okay? And they're on all the time. They're horrifying, if you ask me. Okay, what is it? You've seen this story. The story opens up, and there's a reporter that says, we're here with Captain Jack Smith. He's been in Afghanistan for the last year. His family thinks he's coming home in January, but his company got home last night, a month ahead of time. And his family doesn't know, and we're going to surprise his son at school. Have you seen this? I mean, 2 or 3 times a year. So, my first response is, oh really, do we need to do that? Isn't this a private moment, a family moment? We're Channel 8 News, we're all going to watch this thing? But invariably, here's how it plays out. The camera has the Army captain in his fatigue uniform, and he's walking down the hallway of the middle school with the principal. They open the door, and the camera pans the kids, and it stops on some 12-year-old 6th grade boy. And you see the 6th grade boy's face. What's the first thing the kid does? Starts to cry. Just bursts into tears. And then the kid gets up from his desk and he does this. And he pushes his father in the hallway. What just happened? What just happened was this boy, Michael, he hasn't seen his father in a year. Everybody who loves him has said, Mikey, don't worry about Daddy. Daddy's not near the fighting. Everybody has tried to protect this boy from the fear. But he's 12, he's not 2. You can be guaranteed that boy in the dark of his bedroom at night has been terrified because he knows not everybody's daddy has come home, or they come home in a wheelchair. Okay? So he sees his father. The middle brain operates first in a child, and the middle brain says, oh my God, my daddy is here, and he's safe, and he's whole. And the boy starts to cry. That information then goes up to the cognitive brain, which says, yeah, Mikey, Dad's here. He looks good. Are you aware, Mike, you're sobbing in front of Jimmy McGillicuddy and Brian Sawin, and on the playground, boy, are you going to get the baby treatment, whatever. So he went from the first response was emotional up to the cognitive response. And that's how the brain works. Less so in adulthood. Adults taking information more often right into the adult brain, but children don't. So if children receive information through the 5 senses, okay, and it's marinated, even for a few seconds, in the emotional brain, what does that mean? Well, that's the definition of math anxiety. Math anxiety is children who learn math at the wrong pace, with teachers with whom they don't feel safe or known. Over time, you be guaranteed you're going to grow a person who is uncomfortable or anxious with numbers. I have math anxiety. I had nuns, They were good at some things, not so good with math. At least not so good with me and math. But I mean, to me, a great moment in my life was when I could afford to have somebody else do my tax returns.